How are you, James?
Oh, it's good. I'm good. It's good. It's very nice to see you, as
Uh,
always. Yeah, yeah. Things are a little, little bumpy here, but I'm about to head back to New York for 3 or 4 months, so I'm looking forward to that. And I don't know if you've heard, but you remember Antero Ali? He interviewed you a long
of
while
course,
back. Yeah,
of course.
yeah. He's ill, and so I'm traveling up to Portland to see him. I guess one final time. He's turned down chemotherapy, so I'm not exactly sure why, but
Oh,
so he's on the last leg of his journey, which is
oh,
sad, but also it's quite instructive to kind of be in some way connected to him as he goes through that process because he has quite a bit of serenity and dignity and spaciousness and through it. So yeah,
oh,
yeah.
oh. How old is he?
I believe he's 70 now, which is
70. Oh,
yeah, which is
oh,
not old, these days. I suppose it still is around the average life expectancy in
yeah.
America, but mm,
Oh my. So
yeah,
he has some kind of generalized cancer happening.
Hodgkin's lymphoma,
Oh
yeah,
my.
yeah,
Oh my.
which
Will you please give him my love? I remember him well. I appreciate the interview that he did and
mm,
our interaction. And of course, I've been in touch with him through you,
mm.
looking at his work. So,
Oh, that's right. I did send you some links to his films or something at some point, didn't I?
yeah, you
Yes,
did.
yeah.
Tell him that I'll be thinking of him and sending him support
Mm.
from
I'm sure
France.
I'm sure he'll appreciate that.
Mm.
It's interesting because the both of you, his relationship to Sylvie, which I don't think you know her, or I don't think you've had any awareness of, but it's a very sweet connection, and in a lot of ways does, for me, in my experience and perception, is a lot like what I glean from witnessing you and Nancy. They don't have kids; they didn't choose that family sort of domestic life, and but they make work together. Um, and they
Mm.
put out a few things recently in these at this stage, short videos that they've made together or collaborations of writing. He wrote a last book, and she's put some writing in the back of that book. Um, so it's really, yeah, I think it's a kind of a model or an inspiration. What both of you as couples for um, so, yeah, what what's possible in partnership in terms of creativity and
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Nancy's right here next to me. She's not on screen.
Yeah, I'll just say hello.
She's going to say hello.
Hi, Nancy. Oh, always makes me feel so happy to see both of you.
I've been looking at you from the side, so
Uh,
I get gotten more of you than you've gotten of me.
it's okay. Yeah, but it's lovely. Your presence is always here. But it's lovely to see you.
I'm right here,
Great.
side by side,
Yeah. Me
and
too. So
inside.
cute.
Nancy's here,
um,
but she's not so good at looking at the screen, so she
mm,
just is there.
sits
And,
off it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm totally fine with that and used to it by now. So, um, how are you, Paul? How are you both?
We're doing well.
Yeah.
We uh, during this COVID time, we haven't been sick. We haven't had COVID. In fact, we haven't had even a flu or a cold for 3 years.
Oh wow.
We haven't been sick at all
Mm,
because we've been so isolated and
mm,
canceled our trips to our big trips to Venice and these things that we have done normally, and we canceled a film, and so we've been very isolated. And maintaining, even to this day, all these protocols to be careful, and we haven't been sick. So this period for us has been a period of inordinate health and peace in a way, because we've been so isolated. So we haven't had the same kind of stress as going out in the world. And in France, they do the kissing thing on each cheek, and you get sick all the time because people do it even when they're very, very sick. So we've done none of that. So we're well. I think we're doing really well at this stage.
Teaching a lot.
We're teaching a lot, Nancy said, on Zoom.
Oh,
So
good.
and just this fall, people started to come in person again. On that, even though there's a strict protocol that Nancy has set up, she's particularly demanding about people who come here to make sure that everything is a way where there won't be any exchange of any kind of anything. So we've first two groups, small groups, just 2 people each time have come. And now so we're starting to get back in the circuit of teaching live again. Planning to travel to Denmark, and we're getting ready to go places. So we're starting to move again. But our health has been really well. Really good.
That's fabulous. Yeah, I was going to ask if the Zoom teaching, I mean, you must be relieved at some level to be back in person, even if it is just under protocols and with 1 or 2 people. Did you find the Zoom teaching actually quite fulfilling? And
well, it created a transition. I've found it very fulfilling in a certain way during that period, because before that we were doing these groups of 9 people, and it was a whole week-long thing of people coming to be together, eat together. There was a whole social aspect, and then it was 6 hours of work every day in the studio, or in the morning lunch, 2 more. It was a whole thing. And so when the social part was taken out of it initially, it was some kind of a relief to me. I could just work and get to the point. So we were doing 2-day workshops. Each person would get 2 hours of work. So it was 8 hours of work, and it was right to the point. And I was dazzled by how quickly the information could be exchanged through Zoom. When you take away all of the social part, the touching, the kissing, the holding, the hugs, all of a sudden it was almost like telepathy, that I could say certain things to people that I actually wouldn't say in person, that I wouldn't say in a group, because people would react and I'd have to monitor the group. And so when I'm looking at the person and everyone else is in their little box, I could ignore everybody and just transmit the information. So I actually began to find it really satisfying, which completely surprised me, because I thought the human element would be taken out of it. But it was almost like it was a step towards telepathy. Like I felt like, oh, here's technology being used as a tool to get to another stage of human development. So it seemed like, oh, this is fun. This is the glimmers of telepathy, because a lot of what would happen, of course, if I'm dancing with someone and they're dancing and I'm not even looking at them, but somehow the Zoom is holding the connection, then it would work in some kind of way that was better. Also, because we were out of the context of performer audience. It busted the whole cultural paradigm. So it was all of a sudden, who's the performer, who's the audience? And in the beginning, I just felt like a tremendous relief that these workshops were over and there were no more dinners and no more long hugs. When I walk in the room and I want to get to work and I'm full of the knowledge that has come to me in the night about everybody. And then there are these long personal hugs to establish emotional ground to do the work. And so it was this feeling of something moving beyond the human morass of emotional and social need.
Yeah.
So I liked it. Now that we're going back, the people that are coming here, we're choosing very specifically and being very careful that people are not coming here to have some fun, but they're coming here to get specific interactions with me and Nancy that are work related. Even if we have a meal together, you understand? So it's not a mix anymore. It's not a party.
It reminds me actually of something that Oertel does with his work, where he introduces what he calls an asocial intent. So it's just you know, he even you know, and he would interview people before they join the group. He would say, basically, what's your motivation for coming? And I just want you to know you're not going to get any of your social needs met here, because we're going to enter in silence and we're going to begin working, and you're going to, like, this is not a place to make new friends and do that. You know, we're not going to be chit chatting before and after. It's just, you enter in silence and we go to work, you know, that kind of thing. But it's interesting that you're finding some version of that actually more satisfying and being free of the social, social element. Yeah,
I love it because each person has half an hour. So it's like I come on and it's click, and everyone goes, "Oh, hi, nice to see you." And I go, "Okay, let's start with," and then and it just happens like that.
Well, I think what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's a little bit of a delay, I think, so forgive me if I'm cutting you off. I think what you said about the kind of non-local element of it, I think, is really interesting too. I've had a little bit of that experience where you're, you know, a lot of what would normally be exchanged in terms of cues or information or maybe even energy that could explain an intuitive experience that I'm having, you know, or a hit about what's happening with that person, it's hard to explain it if we're on Zoom and we're on the other side of the planet or whatever. But then it does start to go, well, there's something else going on here that does seem to be completely non-local, an ability to tap into information or receive, you know, intuitive hit of some kind about what's next for this person or what's required. That's sort of how I'm hearing what you're saying. Am I catching it right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And the other part of it, I was realizing as you're talking, it has to do with the fact that there's a huge transition happening now between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, and we're right in the middle of it. So if you read the works, like for an example of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, where they're talking about the new human, and they're saying that the old human is over. So if you get out of the room and you're not there, then you can go to the new human in a sense, because when you get together with a group of people, you have to honor humanism as we know it. So it has to have emotional contexts that we say mean I care. I'm a nice person. I'm warm and loving. You know, we have all this stuff that is part of the emotional system of what is beginning to look like an antiquated human being. But you have to have it in order to function together in the room, because it's not possible for people to say, well, let's now just be in the void of what we aren't yet, and in the void away from what we need to get away from. So to be in the void, you can do it on Zoom. Isn't that right?
And you've noticed, I'm going to stay with this because it's fascinating and it's what's coming up. And you've noticed that when you've transitioned back to working in person, that some dimension of that has stuck around, meaning you're able to let go of some of the social posturing or social, whatever that old context was, a little bit, and the interactions in person are also feeling new or different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I evolved through the process also to see that I could get away with it.
Yeah.
In other words, I've never been able to get away with it. I tried in a way for 30 years at Naropa. I was always trying to do this, but there were so many experiences where it wouldn't work because it shocked me. There's always this pull back into the complexity of the unresolved human psyche, this unresolved emotional system that is warping and trying to finish itself off, but it looks like it needs to just go like that rather than let's work this all out so we can have it good. It's sort of like, wow, this is a big mess. Now let's be something different that comes out of that and that is part of that and was from that, but is not that. So you see, so you can't get away with it in the old emotional context without looking like you are anti-human, which you're not. You're just pro-human in a way that is more useful.
It's
What's happening?
If the question it brings up for me is, and part of reaching out to you today, obviously, always making connection is like really warms my heart, and I love you guys. I love having any excuse to have contact with you, although I've let it go way too long over the years without staying in contact. But part of the impulse today was it came to me, during my time in meditation to reconnect and to maybe actually do an interview with you, a recording. And part of that was, to what I have some recordings from my PhD that I've done with people over the years, and some outside the context of that research. But I think those are useful as a collection of people who are interested in topics related to spirituality and performance. And especially with you two, I wanted to take some of the conversations that we've had over the years, and obviously some of the work you've done, and see if I can put together something that would be a contribution to that collection of stories and interviews. So, and so part of that is I want to back up a little bit. I think it would be helpful for people who may come across this at some point to have some background on where you guys come from and what you're up to. And so all that said, what you just said was interesting, which is what you've been trying to do it for a long time back at Naropa. And I'm curious how you would articulate the it that you've been trying to do, like that all that stuff is getting in the way of.
This is all being recorded. Yes, Nancy, what?
Is it all being recorded?
Yeah, it started recording from the beginning. Nancy was just asking if it was being recorded, and I said yes.
It is, yeah. And I'll send it to you and make sure, before I put up anything anywhere, I'll make sure you guys have a chance to look at it. I want to reassure you of that.
Okay, Nancy. The it on stage, the choreography that Nancy created, the way that I enjoyed being as a performer, it had to do with the expression of essences, of foundational material of existence, rather than specifically the story and the emotional material that is the surface manifestation of this thing that is so clean and out of that context. So there was a kind of wanting always to go beyond notions of art, psychology, and forms down to pure sensation of expression. And the eroticism of existence, the divine eroticism. So I think what I was always looking for and feel like I did was express this transpersonal eroticism that contains sexuality, but is not sexual per se. And of course, when you're trying to do something like that at the Boulder School of Massage Therapy or at Naropa, in a milieu that is so filled with confusions on all those levels, things can be misunderstood and can be confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's fun to hear you, take a stab at articulating it, because I think it's, yeah, I obviously I have an experience of you both and what you've done. Obviously, I haven't experienced everything, but I have a good, strong feel of what it is. And it is hard to put into words, For the sake of our conversation today, I wonder if do you mind if I have a little bit of a structure. Do you mind if I back up a little bit?
No, I'm assuming that you're going to take it the way you need to take it for your creation. I'm responding to the way you're going. Whichever way you go, I'll go, because I know that you're making a creation here.
Yeah. I appreciate that. So I'm sort of interested in, with a lot of these talks I've had with people, and backing up to origin stories, as it were, like how did it come to pass that those are the things that what you just described is the thing that you've been trying to do for so long? Like, it occurs with you, so a lot of times I'll ask questions about sort of early life experiences that led to being a performer. But with you, for some reason today, I'm actually curious, do you have any strong sensation or experiences of either pre-early life? I guess I'll put it that way, meaning like sometimes people in transpersonal psychology will talk even about natal, experiences in the pre-birth experiences, or even further back, past life. Have you ever had any sort of strong sensation or experience of that some of what you brought into this life was karmically carried from some previous incarnation, or is that something that doesn't kind of fall on your radar at all?
It was constant.
Really?
It was constant right from the very beginning. It was right there. We lived in San Mateo. There's a timeline. I could give you the timeline of what happened if you want that. To answer your question, yes, it was like floods of imagery that were coming into my body from ancient times, particularly Greek, Egyptian, all kinds of sensations that were profoundly erotic. And then I was raised very strict Catholic, so there was this flood of material that was then mixed with the fact that I was obsessed with nature. I went to college for a couple of years to be either a doctor or an ecologist. I was obsessed with birds, and I raised wild birds from the Junior Museum, all the birds that fell out of nests. So I always had birds around me, and fish, and animals, and I was always in nature looking at birds and sitting with birds. And so there was that mix. And then from childhood, from very early, all I wanted to do besides be in nature was make art. That's all I wanted to do, was to play the piano, play my oboe, play my saxophone, play, draw, paint, sing, dance, anything. That's all I wanted to do 24/7. So I was in this world of a mix of art, this erotic imagery coming at me from ancient Greek, and I would sit in class and paint pillars, and and as a little kid I was painting temples. Like, what was that? So there was a lot of playback to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, back to is all that means in terms of human sexuality, sensuality, and more. And Egypt too is just incredible. And then that mixed with all the painting I was doing and drawing and singing and dancing and music, and then the nature, going out into the woods, where in California in those days, the nature was psychedelic. Don't have anything like that anymore. It was like coveys of quail where you'd walk along and and birds, these big oak trees, and there would be, you could count 15 different species of birds in one tree. It was insane. And when I went back there a long time ago, but years later, it was all gone. It just vanished. So it was this psychedelic feeling of the purity of nature mixed with a culture that was rarefied because it was middle America in the 50s, 60s, where it was just like purity, unimaginable purity and goodness in these small California towns, just like there was no model for anything but everybody realizing themselves, And so it was that mix, I think, that came together and was exploding in me and also repressed in me because I was also, it's an interesting, when I was in high school, I was president of everything and all that, I was body president and chief justice and all that. So I was also in the oppression of the culture, and the whole thing was boiling in me underneath. So there's some idea of that period.
So that's it's the imagery from ancient Greece, Egypt. That sounds like a very strong experience, and it just and they would come internal images almost as if memories, or maybe very exactly like memories, but they would just sort of flood over you even at a very early age without particularly being prompted or triggered or anything. Yeah.
They would come to me like in the morning or the evening when I was in bed, and I was there, and all of a sudden my body would be filled with this heat of eroticism and imagery, like I was back in ancient Greek times, or in some kind of culture where sexuality and sensuality was very much part of the culture. So that was all happening.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of things. Very Dionysian. I think of the early Dionysus cults, excuse me, even before Dionysian theater festivals, obviously, even well before that. And they were, apparently from some of the research I've seen, they were not just in Greece. Those kinds of Dionysus cults actually spread to large corners of the world. But in any case, so you grew up, just to get some like concretes, you grew up, where were you actually born and raised?
I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. Then my parents moved to the Bay Area. So I was raised in San Mateo, California. My father was a meteorologist, and he would work in Northern California in the fire weather season. In the summer, we would go north, and then we moved to Redding when I went into 7th grade. So 7th, 8th grade, and through high school, I was in Redding. And then after that, 5 years in Berkeley, where I got my undergraduate degree. Then it was 3 years in New York, where I got my MFA in acting. And then in 1975, I moved to Boulder, married Nancy, and started teaching at Naropa. And the rest of it was being in Naropa for 30 years and the university, and Nancy and I coming back and forth to Europe and touring around the United States. So that was all the dance company and all of that.
And then the last, what is it now, 15 you've been in Europe, in South of France?
We actually bought this house in 2007, but we came here in 2005. I stopped teaching at Naropa in 2005. And then we came here to check it out, but we haven't been back to the United States since 2007.
Wow.
We've been here.
Normally I would ask if there were any like formative events that put you on the path of performance or looking for a certain kind of spiritual experience of some kind in performance. But in some ways with you, it sounds like it was so ubiquitous and built in from the get-go with your experience of just art making in general and these strong experiences of energy that you were feeling as a kid. It just sounds like there wasn't really a starting point for the journey. It was just like from the get-go.
That's it,
Yeah,
James.
yeah.
I was like that. I was like, I have a lot of Aries in my chart. I have double Aries, 5 planets in Aries. So I was like I was born on fire.
Yeah.
Enthusiasm. I was like, hi, I came out of the room
Yeah.
like, hi, I'm Paul. Da, 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 da. It was on that level, coming out of the womb, dancing kind of thing.
When, no, I'm assuming that maybe there was a lot of, and maybe the making creative work was sacred right from the beginning, and you found lots of lovely teachers right from the beginning who were kind of on the same wavelength. But I know you eventually worked with Joseph Chaikin a little bit when you were in New York, and obviously found your compatriot in Nancy. I'm wondering if there was anyone else as you went along in your training. Did you find certain aspects of your training completely dissatisfying and inadequate, and other, teachers, or to the other side, whether certain teachers or ways of working that really worked for you, like unlocked something for you, or made you feel like this is a path for me?
It was very vast. There were so many teachers. The journey, what happened at Berkeley was I started out in pre-med, and I went 2 years in pre-med, and then I shifted into dramatic art. And there were people there. I think I was very much impacted there by Marnie Thomas. No, you wouldn't know that these were people. The first time I was introduced to Graham and all that kind of stuff, Martha Graham, and then there's so many vast things. One of the people that really impacted me in theater was Richard Cheslak, who was Grotowski's main actor. He came to NYU and he did a workshop. He picked out 13 people. And I think that really changed my life. From the very beginning, when I was at Berkeley, I was attracted to Joseph Chaikin and to Jean-Louis Barrault, who came and performed there. I was attracted to a certain kind of work. In fact, I followed Chaikin from Berkeley to Santa Cruz. I just went crazy watching his work. So he was very influential. And then when I went to NYU School of the Arts, it's a funny story because I auditioned for that school. They only picked out a certain amount of people. And I got in, I think, because the audition I did was so crazy. I hadn't done anything like that. I had made a piece on what a piece of work is man. And it was my first body work, like physical. I was like, by then I wasn't interested so much in expressing emotion as I was expressing primal physical states. So they said, you had to do one monologue, one Shakespeare, and one sing a song. And they said, thank you. I said, no, but I got something else I have to show you. And I did this piece, what a piece of work is man. And I actually climbed up to the table where they were all sitting and climbed up the table and did a whole thing like so on. I was rolling around on the table with the judges. And I said, this is my vision. I have a vision of theater that is physicalized sensation, that is beyond emotion, story, and character. What do you think? Sort of this. And they said, let's get out. I was 20, early 20s. So that's how I got in. So Cheslak actually, then I had a train wreck with the very program that I got into. Because it was teaching. My acting teacher was Olympia Dukakis. And in fact, she had a huge impact on my life because we hit a train wreck, the two of us, around this issue. Because she, in those days, they were teaching pure creation of emotion. The idea as an actor, you have tears, you cry, you look at the chair and you imagine it's your dead mother and you start crying. You do all this kind of stuff. And for me, it was like, wow, that chair is so beautiful. I think I'll just like become the chair and dissolve into the chair and weave myself into the chair. Isn't that interesting enough? No, Chekhov. You see what I mean? And so it was a conflict. So those people were impactful. However, Cheslak then came and he picked out a group of people, and he picked me because my hands were, he told me later, my hands were trembling so much that it interested me. I was just so like, I really have to study with you. And he said that interested him, that I was dismantled, that I was disarmed by my own inability to keep it together and my own passion and desire. So he got me in the class. But we did things in there. We had our own room, and I'd never had an experience like this, being from California, where we worked from 11 at night until dawn. And we didn't have any of our other classes. And we were this special group, and we had our own room with a locked thing. And we did things like, for an example, I got up and started to do something once, and there was a whole tub of water that someone had brought in, because we were doing rituals in those days where we were pricking our fingers, and then sharing our blood and listening to Dylan and, stuff like this. So what he did with me was, I was trying to do a scene, and there was a tub of water that someone had brought in, and this was, an upstairs room with a rug and everything. And he threw me on the floor. He threw the water on me. Oh, this whole big, huge tub of water. And then he just rolled me back and forth in the water till I was like, now do the speech. And it was this kind of stuff. So it was that feeling. There's an anecdotal story that I love, is that he wore the same blue corduroy shirt every day. And he smoked a lot of cigarettes for a month. And the last day of class, and this shirt by the end, just reeked of body odor. And
oh God,
wore that shirt. And the last day of class, he took off his shirt and he ripped it into little pieces with his teeth, and he gave each person a piece of his shirt.
Oh my God.
It was on that level. So that was when I got this sense that I want to do things that are not in the culture of rational sequence. I want to do things that are raw and wild.
And what year was that?
That was 1975.
75, yeah.
Fall of 75. Graduated in the spring.
So you had lived in the 60s and 70s through high school or early 70s. Your first time in college in Berkeley.
It was fall of 74. Nancy's correcting me.
We got married in the spring.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It was fall of 74, because I graduated in the spring of 75. We got married in the summer of 75. Thank you, Nancy. So, yes, so I was very shaped by the 60s. I was born in 49. So then I
49.
Born in 49. So I lived the 50s in California dreaming.
Right.
Then I lived Berkeley in the 60s, New York in the early 70s, and Boulder in the 70s and 80s. So I was always in places that were like where things were happening in a happy way.
Yeah. That's a blessing. Life is
happening.
Happening.
Yeah. but it's also it's interesting because as we get towards the end of our conversation today, one of the curious things for me, and we've already sort of touched on a little bit, is sort of what's happening now, or what we see as unfolding going forward, and that's always an interesting question for me from an evolutionary standpoint. So I know that like it's I could see how, if I back up and look at the bigger kind of thread of evolutionary unfolding of theater and of time and performance, like, you were there you were perfectly poised, having grown up in the 50s, and then, like you said, in high school and college through the 60s and early 70s, to be dialed into that, to Chaikin and Czeslak, and be exposed to that, to join that sort of thrust of exploration, aesthetics, and style. I think you've also done maybe. I mean, I know that Chaikin and Grotowski, obviously, and Czeslak were very tuned into some very, very deep threads, but I also get a sensation that you've found your own, maybe taken certain things a step further, and or found your own direction with, obviously, some of the things that they were exploring and that they exposed you to. But because I like I said, we'll get to this a little more later, but I'm curious where we're headed these days, because I don't see a Grotowski or a Czeslak, and the culture is moving in different ways that I think are sometimes hard to put a finger on. But let's circle back to that. Is that cool?
Yes, I'd like to take. There is, let's go back to that. Where are we going now in the culture?
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. I wanted to tell you that part of the answer has to do, because there were other people in there too, like Andre Gregory, and the NYU at that time was downtown on 7th Street, and it was the antidote, if you will, to Juilliard. Town west, we were downtown east, so it was like all the visionaries in that renegade element. Richard Schechner was there also, teaching classes. Kristen Linklater was the voice teacher.
Yeah.
So it was all that kind of exploration. I wanted to tell you, in terms of where we're going right now, that two huge influences in my life that played into that were Emmett Hutchins, my Rolfer.
Right.
And also Mary Burmeister, the person who taught Jinshin Jitsu. So for me, there was always a huge component of the evolution of consciousness in the physical body. And I think that for me right now, what I am craving in myself, and have always craved and always wanted, is a way of being that is profoundly based in the intuitive faculties of flesh, and that is liberated from preconceived conceptualisms of the mind or of cultures. So where we're heading now for me is a meltdown, complete meltdown of cultures and cultural phenomena into, and I think a meltdown out of technology into an appreciation for humanness, not as a conceptual or intellectual endeavor, but as an interpersonal endeavor of humanness, in the sense of human kindness, human heart, human feeling in the now. So there's some kind of art form that needs to emerge that is purely in those values and cultures as well. So what a culture is going to look like without competition, without territory, without separation, without levels of duality. I don't quite know what that looks like, but I feel that it's a mandate for that to happen. It certainly is for me. I won't survive anymore in the realm of my own contradictions in my mind. But I know I can survive in the moment of this with you, with Nancy, and what I am in this human body.
Well, I think, you were around Europa, so you know that some of the Shambhala people talk about what they call sort of enlightened society, and the idea there is often you start with one individual's awakening, and then maybe you can find a culture that's, a subculture, a small group that's able to operate along those lines, and then perhaps when that happens enough times, the culture at large has a shift. But this is a very small thing, but I'm actually really curious. I have a minor curiosity about the Joseph Chaikin performance that you saw back in Berkeley. Can you tell me a little of what it was, or what the story was around that? The one where you said you saw him at Berkeley and then you followed him to Santa Cruz.
It was the serpent.
Oh.
It has that piece in there where Kennedy is shot.
Yeah.
And the serpent and the beginning with in the Garden of Eden. And I'd never seen anyone before emblemize material through physicalized structures. It was so beautiful and vocalized, like when Kennedy was shot, I remember it. It was like dun, 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 dun. And then they would play it backwards and they would play it forward. And, there was all these physical things. And in the Garden of the Serpent, people were snakes and slithering around each other. And I'd never seen anybody physicalize theater like that. And the sounds too. What they did was sounds and rhythms were incredible. Joe was really good at extracting the sonic essence of language. So if he was more interested, if he was saying, well, I don't know where I'm going. He wasn't interested in the fact that you didn't know where you were going, as he was interested. I don't even know. He wasn't interested in the words, but he was interested in that. What is that? So he would have people doing stuff like that. And then, so he had extracted all the currents of meaning that were the support for the actual content and logical meaning of the words. And so that's what I was attracted to. And it completely electrified me because I hadn't seen anybody get out of conceptualism. I was in a department there where one of the professors, Dr. Rosenberg, had written at Berkeley, he had written I can't remember what it's called, but it's the thing where you count how many times fire is in Macbeth, and then you count how many times water is in Macbeth, and then you count how many times in Hamlet it's fire, and then you compare fire to Macbeth, and then you make conclusions by how many times they appear.
Yeah.
There was all this kind of stuff. So I was in that kind of notion of intellectual study and academia. So when I saw this thing of people going like, then I was just like, oh my God, that's it. We're all going to just get into our bodies and just, it's going to happen.
Just in terms of time, often, like at some point in these things, I will sometimes move from kind of backstory formation to, my research was technically, it was funded by the Esalen Institute, and I focused on I gathered stories of what Michael Murphy, the guy who runs Esalen, he used to call supernormal functioning, which is a little different than spiritual experience, which is kind of something that happens to you, but he was interested in like actual capacities that people would develop, extraordinary or apparently supernormal capacities. You know, in his early literature, it was things like, you know, telepathy and levitation and, you know, things that people thought were not possible. And he was trying to present this idea that, hey, these are actually latent human abilities, just like language is a latent human ability that needs to be cultivated and trained in order to be usable. But anyway, so that's sort of the background of some of these interviews. But so the way I ask that about people is just sort of over the years, obviously there's a long history of collaboration between you and Nancy and in your teaching, and that's the vast majority of your work experience. Were there particular extraordinary moments of, like, they could be breakthroughs or landmarks or moments where you felt, perhaps it was just moments where you felt like this thing that you've been pursuing all these years was, you know, fully realized, or maybe it was a surprising new kind of revelatory, forgive me for the meandering setup here for the question, but
I think that the dream that I have now of what theater is in terms of telepathy and how the body can float. All my life I've had dreams, James. All my main dream is me dancing, floating in a cathedral. I'm just floating and everyone's looking up and and people are saying, how's he doing it? How's he doing it? And I'm just floating like in water. So all of that, and what theater means in terms of all of that, that's a whole thing to talk about, that we could talk about in terms of that vision. Tell me again your question.
So I'm just I'm just looking for one.
I want to tell you that the highlight or the breakthrough have been, for me, it's a daily kind of thing, but the real breakthroughs have been in these pieces that I did with Nancy. You know, she created these pieces that were experiences of that realm in art. So if you look at the number of pieces that Nancy made, I would say it's one breakthrough after another relative to what I was dancing and what I was doing in these pieces. Plus, I was always working for hours in the studio, plus teaching. So the breakthroughs for someone like me are absolutely continuous. They were in the Rolfing sessions with Emmett. They were in watching Mary Burmeister walk around and change flesh with her hands. They were anywhere, you know, she would touch someone and their hips would go like that, or their nose would move over. You know, you watch people who actually are doing these things and putting it together. So the breakthrough towards the whole thing has been, I would say with me, it's a daily event. I think almost on a daily basis, somebody changes my life profoundly. And the people who have been the most powerful, well, there's so many, but clearly it was Emmett and Mary Burmeister and Nancy. I think those are the.
But you had like a trauma journey was a breakthrough experience.
That was Nancy's. I think the epitome, actually, I think Nancy's right. The epitome was a piece that Nancy made for me. My favorite piece I ever did. It was right at the end of the company. It was called Trial by Journey, and it had 70 people in it. And it had the mayor in it, and all kinds of visionaries came up on stage, Nancy, and musicians and all kinds of people. And I was the central character. And I just had a dance belt on, so I was just free body. And it was all about the transition through the human world into the freedom of the flesh. And I think that's the most freely that I've ever danced and ever felt. That.
Can you talk a little bit more about what? Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that piece.
The piece, it was in 5 sections, and there was a spirit guide. 4 sections, was it, Nancy? And there was a spirit guide
Just a second, I have to turn off this air. Go ahead.
There's just so much to talk about. I'm heated up because I'm talking.
Mm.
Yeah, Nancy's concerned because I'm sitting in front of the fire, and so she was concerned it's getting hot.
Yeah.
That piece, then the spirit guide would take me on a journey into another realm, and then there'd be a journey into the human world. So there'd be like,
And you were on trial.
and I was on trial. There was a whole jury of people on stage. And then there was a judge, and they would put me on trial and accuse me of this and accuse me of that. And in the final analysis, I was judged by actually the mayor and all these visionaries. They came up on stage for the food critic for the Daily Camera.
Yes.
And, you know, a man who
Peter Goldfarb.
Producers, a hair designer from town, you know, really like high level Boulder kind of people.
Boulder luminaries.
Boulder luminaries. And they would say things like, he's too this, or he's too that, or, you know, so it was this judgment of, and there was a lady who was on the side with this huge chopping block, who was the whole time she was chopping vegetables and chopping meat and doing these kind of things, a big chopping block. And so I would go on these journeys into the human world. Like there was this one section of just all these decadent creatures where I would enter into the world of decadence, these beasts. And then I would come out with the spirit guide back into this sense of the purity of the spirit world, the purity of my own flesh, the innocence of the human spirit. It was really a tribute to me and what Nancy always knew me, and my own innocence and my own purity. So it was fun to display that and in my flesh on stage. Also during that time, Emmett was rolfing me once a week because he was using me as a kind of experiment. He had been told by a psychic that a dancer would come that he would experiment on, and it was me. So he was just working on me. So my body was just like, all my joints were just loose, and I wasn't held emotionally anywhere. So I was just floating in the ecstasy of it all. So I was just out there in simple, ecstatic joy, innocence.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, that's.
Well, Nancy, at the end, there was this beautiful music. It was Philip Glass, and the door it was in Chautauqua Auditorium, and the door opened to the back. And this little child, he was 4 years old, came in, and he and I danced at the end because he was the new species coming in. And then at the end, and he also was almost completely nude. And then at the end, he and I swirled and danced. And then there was, and then remember, they built a pyramid at the end because there were these didgeridoo players that came in. And there was a whole poem that a friend had written. I give my heart to the spirit gives a heart to me. I give my body to the animals give their bodies back. There was all this stuff with drums and the birth of the new man. It's very the new species.
I can really see how that might be an actualization of, or like a peak moment for so many of the threads of what we've been talking about, you know.
It really was.
For, you know, coming from like a Catholic upbringing and those early child experiences of, you know, ecstasy and embodiment, and then all that judgment potentially around you, and how much, because I know that, you know, some of the things we've talked about in the past, you know, I know you've shared when we were working together periodically, you know, sessions in Boulder, shared with me like periods of time where you worked on judgment towards yourself, you know, working in the mirror, and skipping what, you know, and so it makes sense at some point of also dealing with all the, or ritualizing in some theatrical form, you know, the judgments of all the different things around you, and what could, what's a good word, squelch or hide or, you know, squish down that your freedom in that way, to be able to dance freely. And it strikes me, I mean, perhaps you're very conscious of this, but you know, that in your description of what it was, especially towards the end of that piece, it does sound quite a lot like that vision you had of levitating and dancing in a church. It does. There's a lot of similarity, it feels like, between the two.
It was, oh, Nancy wants me to say.
Flashlights were their highlight.
Oh my
How
God.
could you forget?
How could I forget? Nancy made a piece at this same time
A
called,
video.
and we have a video of that,
No,
it-
no, sights. I'm talking about the filming. That was a highlight.
of the filming of
Of
Flesh.
A highlight of your life was the filming of.
Oh
Yeah,
my
dude.
God, I
That's
forgot
that
about
Flesh
this.
Sight.
There was a piece called Flesh Chronicles. It was just unbelievable that Nancy made with 4 people. Jean-Claude Van Italy was in that actually. And that was beautiful. But Nancy is reminding me that we did a set of films called Flesh Sights, where when we came to France, that was really a peak. That was
a peak.
That was a peak. We came to France. Nancy, I had just a complete breakdown. Nancy's mother died, she had a complete breakdown. We came to France. We were both eating and drinking and dancing with the peasants and going to fetes and drinking a lot and a beautiful red wine. And I had gotten, as a dancer, I was 145 pounds. And at one point I weighed 206.
Ooh.
I was really, we were very social. So we were going to people's houses for dinner every day. And I was living the Bacchanalian dream, 4-hour dinners with wild boar and, wines and all this stuff. We did all that. So what happened was we had this breakdown, and so we looked at each other. We said, "What are we going to do now with our art?" This is a big breakthrough. And I said, "Nancy, I'm not going to make art anymore. I can't stand it. It's not going to work." And we were told to leave America. And so here we were in France. And I said, "What do you want to do with your life, Nancy?" She said, "I want to make films." And she said, "What do you want to do, Paul?" I said, "I want to dance nude in nature and be filmed." So that's what we did. And in the process of doing that, we found this incredible connection. Nancy found all these places. We would walk for hours through the woods to find an old ruined castle where there was a tunnel and we could film in the tunnel. And we had a deal where we'd only film 10 minutes, even if we walked 2 hours to get there. And we filmed all this material of me. And I got back to that place in me in nature where I was just raw, floating in nature. And Nancy was filming, and we filmed all that and we made small films out of it. And that was, I think, a transformational highlight of getting into French culture, leaving American conceptualism, leaving Europa, leaving Puritanism, because the French not Puritan at all, getting away from it all and getting into this country eroticism that was France. So yes, Nancy's pointing that out, that was a huge journey. And then I started reperforming again. And then I made one-man shows in French, and I started performing in France in French. But I had a breakdown that lasted 9 years. I don't, staying all in bed for a whole summer and crying and all that stuff.
Wow. When was that? What period was that?
I was 45 when that started. I had a one-man Hamlet, that Nancy had made that was very, very beautiful. And I had a whole show called On the Sunny Side with all these beautiful costumes and everything. And we had tours and everything was going. And then I just started crying. I couldn't stop crying. And I was just curled up I cried for 2 years. I was on the floor in the fetal position in my studio, just like crying and crying, crying. And teaching at Europa and teaching at the massage school. It was very funny because I couldn't get my pants on. I mean, and in those days I was wearing suits to teach at the massage school because I got a lot of flack about being too erotic with my students. So I started wearing suits, and a jacket, and I put all this stuff on, and I would go and I would teach these movement classes. And then I would just go home and start crying again, and I had like 250 students a week, and I was crying between the classes. So this thing that Nancy and I did coming to France, and it reclaimed the eroticism on another level that I was trying to put into art in America. and finding that there was too much resistance.
Was that part of, ultimately, was that was the cry? Maybe you do or don't know what the crying was, it quote unquote about, but was it somehow connected to the inability to express that because there was so much resistance, or?
It was just the whole thing. It was
Okay.
American culture. It was religion. It was my psyche. It was my way of loving. It was the dance company breaking apart. It was the conflict between ballet and modern dance and my way of moving. I had gotten very skilled at dancing high level modern dance, as it's known in America. I was singing Gershwin. I was doing all this high level art as we know it. And inside me was this spirit that was melting down into telepathy and astral travel. It was a train, plus the complexity of my own androgyny, and saying, oh my God, I'm in love with everybody. I'm in love with the men. I'm in love with the women. I'm just in love. And trying to keep it all in categories that I've gotten good at representing that I don't even think are real. And so I cracked up. It was like a beautiful spiritual epiphany, really. It was quite beautiful.
In retrospect.
In retrospective, Nancy said.
I'm trying to remember, like, just because now I'm curious, like when we worked together in Boulder, I wonder if it was right during that time or right after that time. I think, or maybe even before, because I think I left, and then it was several years before you both left Boulder. So it must have been a little before that.
You know the date?
I was there 2002 or 3 to 2005, I think.
What?
It was in the 80s or the 90s.
What?
When you broke down.
No, it was 43. So it would have been 89. It would have been about two-thirds. No, I don't know. It was right in there. It was right
about that time. Wow.
I could figure it out precisely if you need to know, but it was something like that.
I want to go back real quickly to you were talking about, it sounds like your relationship with, you said Ida Rolf, right? And who was the other bodywork person?
There were two. Well, it was Ida Rolf's work through Emmett Hutchins. He was a student of hers. And the other person was Mary Burmeister, who brought the Jinshin Jitsu from Japan to America.
I see.
So the forms were Rolfing and Jinshin Jitsu.
What would you say the transformations were in both those cases?
Well, it had to do essentially with effortless reality and non-competitiveness and creating space rather than hierarchies of meaning based on power and force. So it was in the Rolfing, it was a model of space where strength comes from alignment and a relationship to gravity. So it was very much different from lifting weights. So it was not creating the image of strength, but it was creating the flow of strength through openness. And in Mary's work, it was really the art of effortless reality, the art of non-competitiveness, non-comparativeness. So it's an art form that is based on nothing we know. As we know art as a sense of superiority, stars, Academy Awards. So it's a sense of egoless reality. So there was another train wreck, if you will, is how do you make art, which I believe I always have, which is not about the ego, really. I always did it James, because I loved it. That it was just me. And in a culture where it's really about levels of success, fame, fortune, hierarchy. So I was doing these very physical, spiritual disciplines that were asking me not to be competitive and ego involved in a culture where that's the point. So you see, there was a war between materialism in the very techniques that I had studied, and I studied them. I was 8 years at the university, can you imagine? 5 years at Berkeley, 3 years for my master's. I was good at techniques that didn't quite match who I am. You get it?
Yeah, for Jin Shin Jitsu, because that's one that I think I've heard you talk about it before, but could you give a quick summary of what that is?
What you do is it's Japanese, you listen to the pulses in the wrists, and from what you hear in the wrists, there's 72 different pulses. You can determine the energetic flows in the body relative to the 12 organ systems. You determine what is blocked, and then there are these 26, what she called safety energy locks on each side of the body, matching pairs. And by putting your hands and doing these formulas that address different issues, you work with the circuitry, the energetic circuitry of the body to unlock the patterns that are blocking in the body, but they're really figments of the mind that manifest in the body. So you're unblocking the mind from delusional material. Do an hour-long session where you listen to the pulses and then hold and do these formulas until the pulses come into harmony. And that's essentially it. And then, of course, the details are more complex, but that's the overall thrust.
Yeah, sounds like a deeply somatic approach, a mind-body sort of, but it's hands-on and with the energetic system. And
that's right.
I think that, I'm very interested in those kinds of things where people are doing outside transformative practices, because that end up sort of feeding back into their work or transforming, of course, who they are, and then that's going to transform the work they make. I'm trying to think, just in terms of time, we talked a little bit at the beginning about Oertel, sort of entering the final leg of his journey, and I know that you had a battle of cancer of your own, and so as I mentioned earlier that I think it might be fun to talk about where we are today in the bigger picture, and maybe you don't think much about what's happening in the world or in the art world at large, as it were, or the theater world at large. But I'm sure you have a good sense of what it is you're doing with your work and with your students. So I'm kind of curious. We've touched a little bit on where you are now, and maybe I'm not sure which question to start with, but do you feel like that you're in a phase of your work, and how would you describe that, the kind of phase of work you're in now and what you're interested in?
Well, the contact with the world and the contact with what's happening in the world is immediate and continuous. Nancy is a referencer to the world. So every day she shows me what's going on in theater and dance. She gets the New York Times online. She gets the New Yorker magazine once a week. She looks up everything. She reads voraciously. She orders books, and she reads me everything. Is connected to what's happening in the culture in terms of the political situation, the war in Ukraine, everything that's going on. Nancy and I are talking about and processing every day. in terms, and in the art scene as well. So we're looking at the whole art scene. So I'm looking at all of this, and what's happening to me is really a kind of glorious meltdown. It's like I've been through this journey of, it's as if I was born with this finished purity that seems to have karmic knowledge in it, and the fire to realize that. And then I went through this journey of collecting all these experiences that gave me the information I needed to have for all kinds of reasons. And now all that knowledge is there, and it's a question of being free of the patterns that are no longer useful. It's sort of like being a crab so that you can hold yourself together. And then once you see you can hold yourself together without any carapace, you let go of the carapace, but not until then. But it's not so easy to let go of it once you've lived in it for so long. So I'd say what's happening to me now is a meltdown into ways of singing, dancing, working, my relationship to the earth. So it's really melting into the vision of what I am without any necessity to compromise or modulate that vision to fit into the world. So right now there's a freedom happening, an incubation. And Nancy and I are heading towards a film that is all ready to go that we want to make in Venice called A Last Sonnet. The sonnet that I wrote, and we have the costumes, we have the sights, and it almost happened, but it was to have been filmed in the spring of 2020. And so it couldn't happen because everything got shut down from COVID. So it didn't happen. So we're still aiming to make that film. So Nancy and I are aiming at a whole series of works that we're planning to make once we both shift. Nancy's dancing regularly. I'm watching her dance. We dance together. I work every day, as I always have. And I'm just waiting for the whole global situation energetically to have some space in it and me to be free, like all humanity. Yes, Nancy?
I think you should tell them about how you've gotten down to gotten all your technique, the dance, the pirouettes, the passes, the singing too.
Oh yeah, there's been
you've been working for years in the studio.
What Nancy said is, although yes, and I still have I have all my songs from all the shows I've done that I recycle every day. So I'm still using old forms, but
in a new way.
In a new way, but in terms of dancing, teaching, singing, I'm incubating into a free float. So that's where I'm at. I'm just breaking down in the most glorious way, and things are finally falling away. Like, oh my God, that did not work for me. I tried that for 50 years. That did not work. Olympia said this, I've been trying to do it. That is not what acting is for me. So I'm sorting out all that and getting to what it all means for me. And when I get there, if I haven't died first, we'll see what happens. Does that answer the question?
Yes, sir.
Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. And this is, I guess this last question or two is connected to, well, some of what we started with, which was Oertel's transition, and also your some sort of experience of past life stuff. I've had contact with a few of my teachers, mentors have been entering the last leg of this particular journey, and I'm wondering if you thought about, well, two things. One is, do you ever consider or think about the legacy or contribution that you leave? Is that something you think about at all? And if so, what do you think about it? And let's start with that.
Well, that's been a major theme. And so there has been, in fact, that's one of the things that Nancy and I've been focusing on is what will happen. There is this book that's just been written about Nancy. There's this film in Splendid Unison. We have that. We are just in the process of cataloging the filmings of all these pieces. There are films of most of it, trying to put them on Vimeo so they're accessible through our website. So, and all of the Nancy has collected all the archives from this whole period, and they're upstairs in the barn here, and she had them all professionally organized in these cases. So yeah, they're going to go to a library. So that's the idea. That's the idea right now, is what is the legacy? And
it's through individuals.
It's through individuals. It has a lot to do. There's that, but in terms of materials that are left, if people want them, we're working to see if there are materials that can be left. A lot of it has to do with teaching one-on-one, getting information and concepts to people as much as I can, and any of the materials that are left from what we did. So that's all in process right now. Getting our wills in order to leave our money.
Sure.
All of that kind of stuff is happening because we don't know what's going to happen. Like Ontario, he was going to go and he left. Now, that could happen to Nancy and or I at any point.
Well, it can happen to any of us at any point, but obviously at a certain stage of life that becomes more relevant. But
the legacy
Nancy says the legacy for her is with each student. It's like on one thing.
And it's, I know that at some level that sense of what we've contributed or what lives beyond us is all kinds of tiny little moments, that are impossible to pin down. Do you have any sense of particular students that you feel like or artists that you've worked with that you feel are people who really carry forward a large portion of what you've been creating as artists, or the thread that you've been following? Somebody who feels like is going to continue down that thread, or do you have this sense of everything's just one big soup and everybody's moving forward?
Oh, there's individuals. There are people that have worked with us for years and years and are really there. Studying and coming here, or when they couldn't come here, sometimes come to meet us in Venice, come here. People who are really dedicated, forming groups, forming communities that are really that we really believe in and support in this particular way of working. So there is that happening, James. Yes.
Yeah.
There are some people who are going in a certain kind of direction, and there's some people who take the work and they make it their own. So it's not I'm saying, Nancy, because it's not a bad thing. It's just taking what we're giving and making it their legacy. And there are other people who are taking what they're learning it from us and making it our legacy and theirs.
Yeah.
I mean, so and we live in it because it's the same. There are people who take it and then use it to make something that is different from what they got from us.
Yeah. I think everybody, there's something bigger at work here. Like, I don't think any of us have to, whatever greater spirit is moving through you or me or anybody is whether or not any one particular person manifests that spirit or actualizes it. It's the greater thing is going to manifest anyway.
Oh yeah, James, I wanted to say something right there because may I put something in without you losing your thought?
Yes, please.
I want to tell you that part of what's happening for me too, in terms of this legacy idea, is there's a feeling in me of letting the whole thing go. So there is a sense of, there are people who are creating a legacy, but there's also a feeling in me that the legacy it doesn't matter because the whole thing is dissolving into something so much bigger. As you say, I could say to myself, oh, well, if I'd stayed in America, I could have been really well known and da. And then, but I'm just singing by myself in the studio. But then I have the feeling when I'm singing that I'm singing for 8 billion people. I wouldn't be singing for 8 billion people on the levels I was singing before. I was singing for the people in the audience. Now it's all dissolving into, it doesn't matter about my personal story or the legacy of material. It's part of something greater. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it makes Nancy nervous when we talk about, who's holding the legacy and who's not. I don't know, James. It's all there, and it's a sticky issue because I've wanted so badly for this beautiful material that Nancy made and that we created to have its after we die thing. Yeah. And it may not. It may or may not. Maybe I stepped on the earth.
Everything is going to disappear.
Yeah.
There's no holding on to videotapes of work that we had done 25, 30 years ago. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. This legacy thing, the older I get, I think if I wanted a legacy, I would have had children. But I don't think that it's that important.
I think
the legacy is the consciousness that we've created between us and in these works and between people. The legacy is the energetic.
Yeah, it's energetic. The energetics that we have with people that will carry on through their energetics. That's what it is. The other is ego for me. It's like, oh, my work.
Yeah.
It's going to die.
You look at all these beautiful things you've done, and you look at all these films and you go, oh, I want everybody to see this. I want everybody to see what we did and how visionary it was and how beautifully I've danced and all this stuff. And then you say, well, but then I'm just not letting it
out of the void and back into the void, and then all will be well. Just to wrap up, I'm wondering. I don't think it really matters, right? But if there is another lifetime, and this is more of just a fun thought experiment, I think, than anything serious. If you were to come back, would you come back? And if so, what do you think you would do? Would you want another life as an artist? Would you do something totally different? Do you want to just be surprised?
Well, I do like hard physical labor. So I was working in the garden the other day thinking, wow, this would be nice to be a mason. But no, I think that the work of this lifetime, sometimes I think it would be so much fun if I'm even coming back to Earth to have the experience of everything I've had without the contradictory mind parasites or overlays of thought forms, but to actually experience what I experienced and experience it without the contradictions of myself and my own human ego and personality getting in the way.
So you'd like to pick up where you left off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not pick up where I left off. It's like it's almost finished.
Yeah, coming fresh.
And I want to come in fresh. And
no karma.
And have the experience. So Nancy just said no karma. I'd like to have the experience with the karma burned away.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what I did, James, I didn't know how beautiful it was until recently. So much karma in there, blurring my sight. So yeah, I'd like to do it like with fresh eyes.
Well, I think that sounds wonderful. I hope. Who knows? Who knows what happens? Like we said a few minutes ago, it doesn't matter a lot of ego, but
or just not come back here, but just stay in the other realms
Yeah.
and be part of it. I don't know, James.
Yeah. Yeah. Like some, the Buddhists talk about like Buddha realms, you know, who knows what the dance company looks like in a Buddha realm. I have no idea, but, um, well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me in this way, and like going along with the occasionally clunky structure of it. So, and yeah,
James, I have to say that this is the best interview I think anyone has ever, don't you feel?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it really, for me, it was. I was sitting over here. So you were in it, so it was hard for you to know. You are an amazing interviewer.
oh,
I'm
Nancy,
sure people have told you that, haven't they?
I don't know if quite like that. It makes me, it really touches me.
I really mean it. I was just on my toes the whole time. You're able to engage people in such a beautiful way. And I really feel that you're listening and feeling what has to happen. You keep track also when you go off and you get back into it. It was
Yeah.
really well done.
Oh,
Really.
thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. That really does. And perhaps I always am, but I just love you two so much that it's just so easy because I so want to honor you and capture something of our connection. And that's probably a big part of why I was engaged in the way I was. So
Maybe we felt loved.
maybe, yeah, which is maybe always the important thing after all. Yeah. Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, James. This is so powerful and transformative, and so beautiful to see you and talk to you and relate to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you'll
I know that, you know, there are countless ways where you guys, you know, are touching people all the time. I think that's true of all of us, you know, that we can't measure. And I know for sure that my work with you has been hugely impactful on me. And I think in some small way, when I teach a workshop or work with a student or just walk through my life, I think that's a part of what all the work you've done carries through me in 1,000 small ways. So
beautiful.
yeah.
That's the legacy.
What's that?
That's the legacy for me.
Yeah.
How it goes through each person.
Yeah. Yeah. In infinite, countless tiny ways. And yeah.
Yes.
That to me, I think, is in many ways when people talk about eternal life or whatever, you know, some sort of continuation. I think that's the way we continue.
I feel that.
Okay.
I love you both.
Love you, James.
Love you, James. Thank you so much for doing this.
Mm.
I'll see you soon. Talk to you soon.
Be well.
Bye.